Well, good morning, everybody,
Good morning.
and welcome to today's webinar on Scheduling 101, where we'll be addressing the essential planning and scheduling elements summarized in the basis of schedule. And so it is it's about 10 o'clock, where we'll give it just another moment before we start the actual presentation. We are recording this workshop. And so I've hit the record button, so everybody is aware of that. We have a hand. So I guess we'll go ahead and start. It's 9:59, and we have a couple minutes before we get to the really critical information that Michael Elwin will be providing for us. So again, welcome to today's webinar, Scheduling 101, where we'll address the essential planning and scheduling elements summarized in the basis of schedule. So I'm Harry Overstreet II. I am the BART Small Business Support Services Post-Award Project Administrator. I am your primary contact for post-award services on the program. If you have any questions about this webinar, or if you have any project-specific questions, please reach out to me, and then we can help address that. So in terms of housekeeping, we have a couple of basic guidelines. We ask that you mute yourself during the presentation. We absolutely want to answer any questions, so we ask that you raise your hands to ask a question, or use the chat window on the side to ask questions. I think we'll try and check in between sections on the workshop to see if there are questions. And again, I'm sure Mike will be looking for hands that have been raised to ask questions. And of course, the workshop is being recorded and will eventually be available on our YouTube channel. So here's a brief overview of our program. We have some excellent pre-award services designed to help you pursue and obtain BART construction contracts. At the moment, our program is focused specifically on construction, but these are the listing on the left are our pre-award services. Again, on the right are post-award services, listing of many of the processes and procedures that we're available to assist with. We have our one-on-one training, and we have information on our YouTube channel. And so again, this is our webinar, Scheduling 101. And with that, I'd like to introduce your presenter, Michael Elwin from M. Lee Corp.
Hello, everybody. It's nice to be here, privilege, and I'm glad everybody that is in the meeting could make it. Looking forward to speaking with you about schedule basis and how it relates to planning and scheduling and development process of a baseline schedule. And encompasses all of the aspects of BART and how BART basically has different elements related to it to other clients that you may work with. Next slide. Some basic information about me is I'm a consultant. I work with BART on their projects, normally 3 at a time. I have a long background of scheduling experience, been with BART for approximately 6 years. I understand Project Primavera P6 by Oracle and various other scheduling softwares such as Microsoft Project. I'm also involved with regular contract schedules that are pretty much a full-time job with reviewing monthly updates, developing baseline schedules for approval, any type of time impacts for the projects that we have for time or costs, as well as any type of resequencing and recovery schedules and claim potential time impact analysis. Next slide. I've been involved in approximately $600 million since I started with BART in 2018, and these are some of the projects that I've worked on. They relate to basic infrastructure such as component repair shops, warehouses for the trains, as well as line and track work related to power, and also renovations of modernizations of the station work. And next slide, please. And to get started today, we're all here to talk about the webinar scheduling series. We'll get into that briefly. We're also going to talk initially relative to our webinar about some commonly used keywords, as well as get into introduction of scheduling, and then talk about project planning and scheduling and the differences, and also discuss the planning process related to both of those, and then also how all the elements related to those transition into the basis of schedule and the components related to them. Next slide. So SBSS is designed a series of workshops for scheduling, and we're currently on the scheduling one here today on the left. And next month, we're going to get into talking about monthly schedule updates and more details related to the mechanics of doing the schedule and the type of methodologies related to putting in tasks, and more detail on higher level WBS and that type of resource aspects. And then the next series that we were planning to do was basically the contractor's field schedule, which is a 4-week look ahead that's required by the contract, and it's a contractual document, and it's basically the planning and scheduling of the detailed work for the crews by each of these projects, and how they're related to the Gantt chart, and how the ins and outs of that are being utilized at BART. After that, we're going to get into a schedule workshop in April, or in, at the end of August, for what if analysis. We're going to go into contingency planning and some delay mitigation and efficiency analysis, as well as what if schedule analysis in terms of inputting different types of perceived delays into scheduling with P6, and try to understand if we're on schedule, if there are delays when we have not up-to-date updates, and that kind of general information. Next slide, please. And to cap off the key webinar objectives today, number one would be reviewing the essential components of BART and their contract schedules and the ins and outs of how they have requirements that are required per your contract when you go out to get your bid and award. And number two, we will be talking about the increasing understanding of the components of the planning and scheduling requirements and the documentation process for the necessary elements of the basis of schedule. And then last but not least, we'll eliminate uncertainty and provide a clear understanding of the project contract schedule. Next slide. So to start out with some commonly used terms at BART, how many of you guys have heard of the BFS? Well, if you haven't, I'll tell you what it is. It's basically the BART facility standard specification, and it's required by all the contracts as a reference for specifically the schedule, the summary work section, which is 01-1100, which basically defines your scope of your contract. And then what is planning? Planning is the consistent approach to planning is gathering the resources, the estimation of time over the scope of the work. to complete the job as part of the contract. It's defined in the early phases of the project, and it's crucial for bringing all together all the aspects and requirements as part of the contract to make sure that all the ingredients are there and nothing's left out. The scheduling is the execution of, or the identification of the elements for the schedule related to planning and its execution related to the scope of work, ensuring that all the scope of the base contract work is in your schedule. It's developed coherently and methodically, as well as sequenced properly, and it's all in the schedule, very detailed, like, so that there's clear understanding with all parties that are using the schedule as a tool, because the schedule is required, and it affects time and money, and it's contractual. The WBS is thought of, it's an acronym for work breakdown structure, and it's basically organizing the scope of work in either a bottom-up or a top-level, a bottom-up deliverable approach, which would be all the defined deliverables that are the granular elements in the contract that you're getting your award on. But if they're actual different structures or facilities funneled up through the bottom of the contract through all the deliverables, how all the trades affect are related to each of the actual finished pieces of your contract is basically their WBS. And it's done in P6, and we're going to cover that in the next update, but it's an important part of the planning and scheduling process relating to your basis of schedule. OBS is also your organizational breakdown structure, and it's basically how and who's responsible for completing the work. It could be your subs on your project or suppliers or managers or foremen, and how they relate to different aspects of different types of work being provided as part of the scope. Next slide. This is slide 2 for our definitions, and schedule reserve basically is defined as a set number of days that are set aside for any type of contingency, such as risk mitigation that may be perceived as a challenge in a certain time. If it's a seasonal restriction or whatnot, there may be a season that's missed in that specific year. So you may have to come back the next year and have more time and add that into your plan for your costs and your time. Critical path is basically from any point in the schedule, either at the beginning of NTP to substantial completion. It's basically the longest path and the shortest amount of slack in that longest path. So the longest time that it takes for all of the activities to go from the beginning to the end. And it could be during a monthly update, or it could be during NTP. It always changes. It usually always changes, or it can during updates. But for basically starting the project and understanding its execution strategy, there's only one final critical path defined as at the beginning of the project. Path of execution, it's the culmination of scope, of the scope of work, the planning, and the scheduling process, combined with it's also a combined framework that leads to clear and defined project execution. So there's a framework in there and a process that they all have to begin to be successful, usually at the time of the award of the contract that you bid on, as a recommendation for us at BART and for you. And we're always here to help if there are any questions, if needed, for certain elements from our small businesses, to help and assist as part of that process. Schedule basis, which is basically what we're going to get into shortly on our schedule presentation today. It's the outline of the methodology, assumptions, and constraints used to develop the project execution schedule. It communicates the method of schedule development, the metrics and the risks of the project execution strategy, and it's also a living document of the schedule, or sorry, of the project life cycle. So when I say living document, it can be something that is useful as a tool to monitor and progress the happenings of the contract and the project and the schedule. And it can be used in an effective manner, and it also could be a contractual basis as well. So be cognizant of that. Next slide. Introduction to scheduling. So scheduling it's just one of the key tools for monitoring and controlling the project for cost and time. And it's contractual, and it can also lead to cost over. If there are delays, there can be ramifications that can be imposed by the contract that usually has LDs associated to it in the schedule of work under the 01-1100 BART contract spec and as defined in your contract. It is important because it provides a roadmap and baseline for your project, for the team, for the schedule. It defines clear granularity of who's responsible for what aspects in terms of whether it's procurement from your local suppliers. It could be lights coming in on time. It could be railing. It could be anything. Everything that needs to happen when it needs to happen, and for the work crews to be flowing in the direction that they need to be going on from site to site. So that's the importance of why scheduling is important, and having an approved monthly update each time there is a required monthly update, which there is important because it is connected to your pay application, and everybody wants to have their payment on time. It also, and I covered the resources. Yeah, so next, additional resources are also available at the BART BFS, which I had mentioned on the prior slide. And it's the latest version is the 2020 version from December 3.2, and that's 03216. Construction progress schedule is where it talks about your contract requirements for your contract schedule. Next slide. Project planning versus scheduling. So planning is strategic and scheduling is tactical. And planning consists of planning the work, the resources, and estimating costs over time to complete the scope of work as defined in the early phases of the project. Scheduling includes the identification of lots of elements related, which are the scope of work, which are developed into work packages, the sequence and phased, and then added in fragments and discrete activities. Next slide. Okay, project planning and scheduling. We're going to basically go from the left to the right, and what happens first is in your 01-11 under your contract, there's basically and your project description and your bid and award. Those two pieces of information are related to your scope of work, which is more defined, and it's in your 01-1100 contract spec. And all the scope of work, the type of work, and the earlier possible time that you can get understanding and a grasp of it and have everything that you need about it is important to know, because it leads to the planning process, and to get an early start on understanding your scope by talking to your RE at BART and getting involved in a pre-con meeting or even a site visit is crucial to start an early form of communication with your scope of work, because there might be changes related to your contract that might not have been known at the time of your bid and award, closer toward NTP. Planning process. Planning process is important because it's understanding the project scope, it's identifying the stakeholders, it's defining the high-level strategy, it's conducting site surveys, it's defining constructability, it's defining the procurement strategy, it's defining the subcontracting strategy, and it's also developing the WBS and OBS. And it's also identifying alternatives and exclusions and identifying risks and opportunities. Excuse me, The exclusions is on the scheduling process. I take that back. And then next, we're going to talk about the scheduling process and how the planning process also has like an approval of once it's bought in by, internally, there's a scheduling process that bridges over to it. And that's basically the review stages of the development of the schedule, phasing, identifying activities and tasks, developing logic for the activities, estimating durations, I should say, allocating resources, which isn't necessarily cost loading the schedule per se, because at BART, we do not have a requirement for a cost loaded schedule. That's done outside of the schedule, but it can still identify who the resources are with the coding of the schedule, which is important to highlight who all the different subs are in your P6. And we can talk further about that in the next session webinar. Also, least but not last is critical path, which is the critical path of execution for the job before you get your approval for your baseline. That's going to probably be close to what your critical path will be once you get to your baseline and develop it fully and have it go through its review stages. Key project dates are always important for senior management and stakeholders at BART, and anybody that is with the CM team, your RE and your project managers on your contracts, and opportunities and reviewing assumptions and reviewing exclusions. And then all of that, those last three flow diagrams are basically your basis of your schedule basis that needs to capture all of the information when used when developing the contract schedule. So once that's all concluded, you then get approval to do or you can approve as sort of a check mark. All your checklists are checked. You then go into the documenting and communicating the contract schedule and its development, which are the last two boxes. Any questions? Okay, next slide. Yeah, components of the contract schedule are what are the goals to achieve by documenting its schedule basis, and what are the content that should be in the base, and what is the ingredients that are part of the basis or the components, and what are the implications of poor or complete schedule basis. And I've seen a lot of schedules, either monthly updates after the project's gone out to bid and gotten approved baselines, as well as before, that take numerous iterations to get clear understanding and definition of what is actually in the schedule, because it's not written out and it's not documented, and it's just, you don't know. And having it is crucial and priceless to know, because it helps all understand and all the transparency be there, and there's no surprises later in the game. Why do we document the schedule basis? Why should the basis of schedule be documented? Well, it should be documented because of what I just said. Basically, if you don't have a basis of schedule and you just have a schedule, there's no understanding of how the schedule became about and where it's going and why it got formed. How well is the construction industry doing it? I would say 43% do it really well, and 63% or do it so well. I'd say 63% do it very well, and I'd say the rest of them aren't doing it from a scale of 0 to 100. So that's why we're talking about this as part of the first webinar series. Next slide, please. Okay, the contract schedule represents how agreement of the project is to be built and the contract's going to be executed. It must include the approved scope of work as agreed between both parties during your signing of the contract. Slide. It's goals. Identifying key elements and issues and assumptions is very, very important in the development. and it gives us a better understanding of why or why not something's included in the contract baseline schedule or any schedule during a rebaseline or whatnot. It provides records of documents, whether it's submittals, whether it's changes, whether it's any type of issue or risk that are going in or happening to the schedule, and it's while it's being prepared. It also allows for benchmarking, basically, of either lessons learned from prior projects, to understand durations for how long it's going to take to do a certain set of activities or one activity, and also gives better validation for the schedule. And then during the process of the life cycle, once it's executed, the benchmarking can be a comparison between the update of whether you're on schedule or late. And we'll get more into that on the next webinar. Information informs the project team of risks and opportunities. I think that's very, very crucial, because having prepared for risk and opportunities rather than waiting until they happen is preempting and being not reactive but proactive. Establishing the baseline for change management, whether you have change notices, it can be documented during the scheduled basis as it continues during the life cycle of the project. And review and validation of the schedule. It is the roadmap to finishing on time and under budget or within budget, and that's what everybody is looking for. Next slide. We have a question, I think, in chat. I don't know. Let's see.
Michael, I took a question about the presentation, if it would be shared, and the presentation is available. If people reach out to me.
Essential elements to the schedule basis. These are approximately 15 of 17. 2 of them are removed. One was exclusions removed. The other was cost basis, because we don't do that at BART. So that's why we took those out. But we're going to talk about each one of these. This is a roadmap of what we're getting into right now. I'll go over them really quickly. The first is project description, the schedule integration process, and then we're going to go into the scope of work, the WBS and the OBS, execution strategy, key dates for the project, planning basis, critical path, passive execution, and then a very important one is punch list turnover and system startup for our for BART here at BART. Issues and concerns, risks and opportunities, assumptions, exclusions, baseline changes, schedule reserve, as well as project buy-in is the last. And then for all of you that would like to understand any of this further and the application of this and the recommended practice, this was all basic basis is all included in the documenting the schedule basis from a source. It's called AACE. It's American Association of Cost Engineering, under 38R06. I highly recommend, if you're new to BART or have not heard of that source, it's a very valuable source for insight for project management and scheduling and cost control. Next slide. All right, project description. This section's basically your bid. When you go out to bid it, it obviously has a project description, usually in the 01-1100, as well as elsewhere within the bid application. It's just basically recognizing that, as well as including any pieces or components that are part of that, and documenting it and updating it as if there are any changes during the scope of work, either through changes or through, any type of scope changes, descope or whatnot. It could be a change that happens later on, but it's usually in the planning phase. It's basically your established scope. Next slide. Okay, so what isn't included in the scope of work, even though it may be laid out in a particular order in your scope of work, and kind of intuitive to think of, well, what are the biggest pieces of your scope? And that's usually the higher levels of the WBS. And the WBS, again, for definition, is the work breakdown structure. So the process of putting activities and durations and milestones and different sequences of work is laid out in these subtasks that lead up higher to actual higher level tasks that are the foundation of what your scope is that's being built, which leads up to the project start and finish date, basically, because it's all underneath the time that you have to do the project. Organizational breakdown structure is basically a org chart with people of who's responsible for what pieces. It can also be coding of who's responsible for different types of trades and work during the subtasks as well as the tasks. So it's detailed as well as can be high level with who the managers are and who's responsible for completing the different types of work. Next slide. Execution strategy for schedule basis. Different types of strategy could be the contracting strategy. It could be a design could be an element in the before the construction to get certain elements of some design completion done. Usually, some examples are fixed price, two-stage contracts or one-stage contracts or construction only work. Usually we just do construction work, but we have a lot of shop drawings as well as design elements that are being done. And the most deliverables, I would say, that are the critical element with BART is the deliverables. And those are all outlined in your div specs. And, you know, they relate to everything that is either being product data that's being pulled in for new elements that are part of your job or etc. Subcontracting strategy is, are you self-perform? Are you a joint venture? What proposed suppliers are your vendors and whatnot? Procurement strategy, whether it's Buy America, some contracts with BART are very strict with that clause that recently has been along with the FTA and rail suppliers. They're very they have a requirement for that as a jurisdiction on our project, so it has to be remembered when you're planning and doing your planning. Constructability strategies, that could be VE, value engineering, and just working with your RE and any experts that you may cohort with and bring onto the project with your team. And usually it's defined in the contract whether there's going to be something modular or something that's like a prefab, or some type of a procurement that's going to be shipped and then pieced together later during the project by the other construction. Cash flow profile is whether your budget is able and going to be aligned with the resources that are being provided to perform the work. And that's always good to stay up on. Next slide.
Quickly, Michael, we have a question in the chat, if I could throw it out quickly. In terms of contract types, what preparation is needed, i.e. pre-approved vendors, etc., if any? So I don't know if you have time to address that or if you want to come back and address that question a little later.
If I could answer that at the end, that would be a little better.
Okay.
Yeah. Next slide. Okay, project key dates. key milestone dates are incredibly important because they are your contract award date, they're your notice to proceed date, which tips off your project, and any type of intermediary milestones. And all of these milestones are relative to what is established as your NTP date usually, and then how long some of these intermediary milestones are, or either defined as by certain specific dates after NTP. Access dates for certain types of egress and ingress for different areas of your project in terms of types of work that's being done. It could be getting down into a platform on a station or whatnot, and actually being able to actually get enough rail down into either a tube or a tunnel. And shutdown dates are super important because they involve either coordinating power with PG&E to do some conduit exploration or ground work when there's any type of need to go in and change something, or add new conduit or electricity. In particular, whether you're establishing new cable for rail for the trains, you need to have blanket different types of time that you're not operating under revenue or during the day, and the trains aren't running, and it has to be planned and scheduled very copiously. Procurement dates are super important, as well as the contract completion date is contractual, so that it also is the tip off to meeting that completed ultimate date for finishing your project. The key dates in the schedule and the basis they're considered basically a living document, and they're subject to change and can have different degrees of variability, whether they're early or late, and always knowing when they're going to happen on time is crucial to also highlight whether something's going to slip or change. That's it. Next slide. Okay. Planning basis. So there's different methods and sources to describe the contract schedule. The methods that can be used are different ways of estimating your activity durations, and it could be whether it's commonly used durations and what type of work it is and how much work it is, could have, and basically lessons learned from prior projects. So there can always be familiarity, bringing that in with you from your past projects onto new projects. And if there's new projects that are not similar and there's a need to understand, SBSS can always provide support for estimating different types of durations, whether it's the complete scope of work for little pieces or actual activities. Project calendars, shutdown calendars, and shift calendars and weather calendars are all highlighted in your 011100 for your summary work. And that is super important to have detailed out in your planning and executed as such in your baseline schedule for all of your different WBS and activities, because it basically tells when you can and can't do work, and it tells who's working when and how many people are planned for that work. And it also describes if you get a weather day, you get extra time, because usually you get, I want to say, 9 to 13 days a year for weather allotted per contract if it's subject to a weather type of impact. Planning also for site, facility, storage, and laydown areas is part of the planning basis, and understanding whether things are going to be able to be accessed and get basically get flaggers in for traffic if you have work restrictions from like different local agencies that have buses in and around different stations or work areas. Sources of planned productivity rates. I would say that's basically the expertise of your project manager and your scheduler, or your foreman, because he would have the most experience if you have a need to understand how long it's going to take to do a cure or pour and spacing of the activities that lead up to that, or basically our successor to that. Resource planning is, again, the different crews and how the size and whether they're going to be able to meet the demands of the scope of the work for specific work elements with their specific activities. Basis for any subcontractor schedules. It's always good to involve your subcontractors in your planning and scheduling early and keep them informed of any schedule or planning variations that happen during the life cycle process of the planning and scheduling of the contract. Next slide. All right, this is my favorite slide. This is critical path, and it's defined in the AACE guidelines as 49R06. This is an example of a section of a critical path on a prior project that we had, and it was about halfway through, or a little more than halfway through. What it's basically showing is different stages of the work and different areas of the work for replacing electrical cable for refurbishing to new cable for a line of the segment of the track. It shows basically when there's testing, when there's punch lists going on, when there's installation of different types of electrical equipment and substations and whatnot, and also when de-energizations are happening for basically shutdowns of electricity to allow work to continue. So it's a linear schedule, and it's an electrical schedule, and it's basically predictable because it's linear. So it's a clear path. Sometimes there can be subpaths as well as multiple paths that relate to critical paths for projects. So the critical projects or critical path is important because there's legal ramifications related to it. It's always related to the approvability of the project schedule as well as the monthly updates. So it always has to make sense. It always is basically the longest path that's being prosecuted with the most urgency, and the execution strategy is basically prosecuting it at the highest level of attentiveness. Next slide. Path of execution. This is just basically a construction sequencing diagram that's showing basically a high-level execution strategy. And it's showing that starting from the left to the right, you would start with civil work for earthwork removal to try to install a foundation along with perimeter retaining walls. And then you would get into the actual center middle section and go into the pilings, the foundation, and the in-ground services. And then you would work on the above surface foundation work for the basement and the structure of the walls. And then the next stage would be the roof, the facade, and the build outs, and then the pertinences outside in terms of egress and landscaping. Next slide. So this is the most important at BART, or one of the most important. It involves punch list turnover, commissioning, and startup. And those are usually done at the end of activities when you're wrapping up your physical work in terms of making sure that your checklist of all the items, of all the scope elements have been checked off, and getting sort of certifications and approval from either fire departments or any type of electrical tests, basically for federal or local jurisdictions for regulations to be approved. And it can also be involved in the pre-commissioning time frame. It's a lengthy process because it usually comes up at the end of the project when the actual elements are needing to be reviewed. And if there's not enough time left, it can create a little bit of a headache because it's a long lead time in terms of getting the people out there and having their agreement and buy-in to come out and meet that. This section should also describe coordination with works to be performed and approved by internal stakeholders and local or jurisdictional authorities. So it's just basically saying to incorporate all the people that are involved in those types of areas in your basis of schedule. Next slide. Okay, issues and concerns. Basically, this topic covers any concerns that are going on with the development of the schedule, to either delve into them further and try to define them and hash them out, and make sure that they are continuing if they're a major concern. The purpose of the section is to identify the issues and concerns that could be resolved prior to the approval of the contract schedule. So basically, this is pretty cut and dry. It is what it is. It could be a change notice that may have happened at the beginning of the contract or the end or the middle. And if there's a concern, it's usually an RFI. But if it's happening before the approval of the contract, it's not a change notice or an RFI. It would just be something with your RE and with the project team to try to hash out. It's advised to keep an issues and concerns log and identifying open and closed and critical items for schedule reviews. That could be land acquisition, incomplete design, RFIs, or changes impacting the work. DSC is its own element as well, and that's basically unforeseen conditions, and that could be asbestos or any type of soil contamination, usually subsurface. Next slide. Risks and opportunities. Potential risks that may occur during the execution of the project are important to identify. There's a quantitative way to do a risk assessment that may be completed to determine the appropriate schedule contingency, and that can be applied. We can talk about that later if there are questions. There's basically a statistical methodology to figure that out as well on the next bullet for contingency and probability for key dates. The schedule basis may include an explanation of how the team plans to identify the risks. So you could have a risk log and weight elements of different elements of the project with different risk ratings, and that should be done during the planning and scheduling and pre-baseline process. Next slide. Assumptions. We all have assumptions. Here at BART, we have a federal holiday pretty much aligned to federal holidays. They're in the 01/11/00, and they're spelled out there. And then you have to basically not work on those days usually, and the trades usually even have more days that they have off with your local union and craft workers. So you have to pay attention to that and understand that process before you build your schedule. Requirements for permits. Permits could be like a local moratorium that affects work during holidays. And it would mean that you have to put in your applications for the processing of that. Maybe could be 3 months or so in advance, so you can get enough time and get clearance so you can actually work, say, during noise restriction hours that are imposed or spelled out in your contract. Specialized equipment when needed. It could be a crane of some type, and having that available could be a certain timing issue that you may need to schedule well in advance. And your labor, will it be available and continuously be available during your contract? It's always good to know, because there's other projects that some of your labor or craft people may be working on, and if there's any intercoordination with that, make sure that they're allocated for your scheduled time that you're going to have them working on the contract. Site will be available after the contract award. Sometimes there's reasons to believe, not a lot, but because BART has its own land, that whether there's certain issues related to the site not being available because there could be use or training groups on it, say during the line and track for BART training, you usually can't work on it during that time. So that's an example. There's other examples as well with getting basically approvability from the local businesses that may be around that site. So you give them enough of a heads up, and the public in general, as well as like different city agencies that are involved revolving around the site. Will power be available to start construction? That could be a laydown area for your contractor and their offices. And they need to have plans to know where they're going to put their power in and connect up. And these are all basically parameters and conditions for determining the outcome of the project start date to complete dates of the project schedule. And we've got a South Park graphic here. Next slide. The schedule basis exclusions. These could be anything that's not shared in your contract. So it's basically outside of the contract and it's not expected to be in it. It's removal of contaminated material, not sharing construction equipment with other people or contractors. Relocation of public utilities for water or power. Provability from authorities, so it could be outside authorities that have to make approvals, and impacts from other contracts. It's intercontracting. Basically, an example of that could be you could have a contractor working on one area where your laydown area is, and it has to be shared space. So there's usually language in your contractor that will identify for you to expect whether or not there will be some contractor coordination going on. So it's always good to read your contract thoroughly before you go and start the project, obviously during the bid and during the NTPO process for your work. Next slide.
Michael, I would like to jump in just really quickly and say that we got about 10 minutes left. I know we got a lot of good information, and that if anybody can't stay, we'll run over. We can stay on overtime. If anybody can't stay, the information is available. There'll be a recording. So that's all. I just want to throw that in there. Please continue.
Okay. Baseline changes. This is the baseline schedule. If you have changes after you've gotten your baseline approved, will you be doing a rebaseline? And if you do, how will it be done and why? And documented very copiously in terms of that development. In terms of that provides better understanding of how the changes happen in the schedule. Has there been a change? Basically, events or delays, is there a CN or something given to require a recovery schedule or an acceleration as part of the outside of the contract? If that's happened, how to describe that and what's contributing to the delay that caused it. That would be another aspect. Next slide. Schedule reserve is basically this. I talked about this briefly before. It's contingency or reserve for time or money to put in the schedule. So it basically adds less risk or mitigates the current risk. And it can be done during seasonality at different places in the schedule. And next slide. Project buy-in. This is our final element for the schedule basis, and it's pretty important because it basically is saying who owns the basis of the schedule, and it establishes the agreement between the two parties, and it defines the completeness of key activities and information. So it's pretty basic. Next slide. Okay, 3 takeaways. Know your contract and scope of work and communicate all questions and concerns to your BART resident engineer as early as possible. Establish a project planning schedule development scheduling approach early, promoting the highest project management and project success. Actively communicate your plan early for stakeholder approval and contractor buy-in. Reach out for SBSS assistance with contractual or scheduling questions as early as possible to obtain timely assistance. And next slide. Any questions?
Okay. Well, all right. Well, it's good job and timing, Michael. We got 6 minutes for questions. And I see we have a question about the schedule for final cleaning. I'm not sure. I don't know if you see that, Michael, if you have any comment on that.
I'm looking now, just a second.
In the chat, it says, where do we find the schedule for final cleaning?
Okay, so that's usually defined in the contract where there would be closeout. There's a closeout section, I believe, in the div specs. And in terms of any type of finishing last part of to leave things, housekeeping type of items and whatnot. There's also there's O&M manuals that are related to, so there is a closeout spec. And O&Ms also are like operation and maintenance manuals or training manuals for anybody that needs to learn how to do something in terms of running the equipment. Hopefully I answered that somewhat.
So you did. Thank you.
Okay.
Sure. And
Great.
then,
Next
and
question?
also,
Sorry.
if I can add any project specific questions that we have, you can always refer to the team, and we can look into that also for you also.
Perfect. Thank you.
Absolutely. And that pretty much completes our presentation for the day. I don't know, are there any more questions? We do want to get to any and all questions if possible.
There was
Darlene Jones has a question.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
My question is, on that slide that was for the scopes of work, can the team also show us what a contract actually looks like for our scopes of work? Thank you.
Yeah. We can do that. Yeah, we can basically show you what the 011100 that's the summary of work in the contract that you're bidding on. I know that they also included in some of the bid documents when you go to bid the project, but we'd be happy to delve into that. I can help you or somebody from SBSS. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll be happy to look into that. Hello, Darlene. Are you if I recall, you have a transportation service?
Yes, we do trucking.
Trucking,
for the dump trucks.
Right,
yeah.
right.
Bart needs some rocks. Got rocks? Need rocks?
I'm sorry?
I said, does Bart need rocks? The rocks.
Rocks?
Yeah, rocks. Oh, they call them bailiffs.
I'm not sure. That's probably a project by project kind of issue, but I'd be happy to talk to you about that afterwards. We can set up an appointment, and and also that might be something we can we'll look into the pre-award to see what's coming up also in terms of that. If that's not a current project specific question.
Oh, okay, thank you.
No problem.
I would also like to set an appointment with you as well, Harry.
Okay, that's great. And who am I speaking to? I'm sorry, I'm trying to catch
I apologize. So this is LaSonia Mansfield. So it's Mansfield, and we provide pre and post construction cleaning. So I know they have emergency stuff, and they got a big project coming up. So I just want to know. I just want to be prepared. So whatever it is I need to do, and I would love to talk to you about that.
Okay, great. Absolutely. And then also what I can do is, because some of that rolls over into our pre-award services. So we can talk about that and probably include our pre-award team also to find out what's coming up and try and help you qualify for, for that work or,
That would be
help you prepare for it.
Yes, thank you. And I'm one of your graduates too, so I completed the program as well. So thank you.
Okay, great, great. Glad to hear it. And thank you for joining us this morning.
Yes, thank you.
Well, if there are any related questions related to the presentation any further, I can take one more. If not,
Hi,
Okay.
this is Carla Tucker with CLT Construction Services. And good morning, everyone. I'd like to know, how can we get a copy of the deck that you just presented?
it's available on the SBSS, I believe, website. I'll let Harry.
Yeah, well, I was just going to jump in. You've just asked, so just remind me, and I will send that to you. Anybody who would like a copy of the presentation, please let me know, and I'm happy to send that out to you. I'll also send out a link to the recording. Eventually, the recording will it might be edited just a little bit, but it'll be on our website. So if I send you the link, it'll probably be like a raw, not a recording, but all the information is available. And just reach out to me. My contact information is on the it's on the presentation, but I'll put it in the chat box also.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And then the last thing, in terms of this slide here with the dates, I do want to say that these dates are tentative. They are subject to change. I think we may have been fairly aggressive with setting these tones because we're really excited about this information. But there will definitely be, we'll reach out to you via email to give you updates on the dates for the series, the workshops. And with that, if there are no more questions, I believe that that will conclude our workshop for the day.
Thank you, Harry. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Okay,
Harry.
thank you.
Thanks, Michael. Good to see you, Harry.
Good to see you too. I want to
Have
thank
a good
everybody
day.
Thank you
for
both.
Bye-bye.
for showing up. All right, great. There you are.
Yes,
All
real
right.
good to see you.
You too.
Okay.
All right. Thanks
bye-bye.
again, everybody. Have a
Yes.
great day and a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.